In 1872, Jamaica had a snake problem. Well, actually, no. They had a rat problem, and those rats were tearing the sugar industry apart. So someone decided the fix was obvious. Ship mongooses over from India. Let nature take care of it. The mongooses would hunt the rats. The rats would vanish. Simple as that. Done. Except the mongooses did eat something. Just not the rats. What happened next became one of the most catastrophic ecological failures in Caribbean history. Stay with me, because this story gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets worse again. Here's the setup. Jamaica in the 1870s was essentially one enormous sugar operation. Sugar was everything. The whole economy depended on it. Britain was raking in money. Plantation owners were thriving. Then the rats arrived. Not a handful of rats. We are talking infestation levels that would make a horror movie look tame. These were not your typical city rats either. These were cane rats, large and aggressive, built for the sugarcane fields, and they ate without stopping. They were wiping out somewhere between 20 and 30% of the sugar harvest every single year. That is millions of pounds in today's money dissolving straight into rat stomachs. Plantation owners threw everything at the problem. Poison failed because the rats reproduced faster than they could be killed. Traps were pointless. They even tried cats. The rats were too big and too many. The cats gave up entirely. There are actual documented reports of cats refusing to hunt because the rat population was simply overwhelming them. So in 1872, a Scottish planter named W. Braftoft Espe thought he had cracked it. He had been hearing about mongooses in India. These animals had a legendary reputation. Fast, aggressive, completely fearless. They had been used for centuries across India to manage snake populations near homes and villages. Espe reasoned that if they could handle cobras, a few cane rats would be nothing. He ordered 9 mongooses shipped from Kolkata, 4 males and 5 females. Sit with that number for a moment. 9 animals. That was all it took to permanently rewire an entire island's ecosystem. The mongooses arrived, and for a while it looked like everything was working. The plantation owners let them loose in the cane fields and watched. The mongooses did hunt rats. There are confirmed accounts of mongoose kills in the fields. Victory, right? Problem handled. Time to move on. Except nobody had asked the most basic question. Mongooses are diurnal. They hunt during daylight hours. They sleep when the sun goes down. Cane rats are nocturnal. They come out after dark, when it is cool and predators are less of a threat. The mongooses and the rats were operating on completely opposite timetables. They were practically living in parallel universes on the same island. So the mongooses were moving through Jamaica during the day, alert and hungry, and they found food. Just not rats. They found ground-nesting birds. They found eggs. They found lizards and frogs. They found sea turtle nests along the beaches. They found chickens on farms. They found basically every creature on the island that moved slower than they did and had no idea what was coming. And here is the thing about mongooses. They are not selective eaters. They are opportunists. Whatever is available, they will take it. Back in India, there were predators to keep their numbers in check. Leopards, tigers, large birds of prey. In Jamaica, there was nothing. No natural enemies at all. The mongooses had landed in paradise. Infinite food, no danger, ideal weather. So they did exactly what any animal would do in that situation. They multiplied at an extraordinary rate. Those original 9 mongooses had become thousands within 10 years. By the early 1900s, hundreds of thousands. Today, estimates place the mongoose population somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million, spread across Jamaica and the other Caribbean islands where they were later brought. 9 animals to millions in roughly a century and a half. That growth rate would impress a virus. As the mongoose numbers exploded, Jamaica's native wildlife began collapsing. The Jamaican iguana pushed to the edge of extinction. The Jamaican coney, a small mammal resembling a rabbit that had been on the island for thousands of years, gone entirely. Ground-nesting birds saw their populations fall by 80 to 90%. Sea turtle nests became an easy meal. The mongooses worked out that beaches were essentially open buffets. Dig up a nest, consume 100 eggs, move to the next one. And here is where the irony becomes almost unbearable. Remember those snakes? The ones that gave this story its title? That part was not a lie. Mongooses do kill snakes. They are famous for it. Jamaica had several native snake species. None of them were venomous. None posed any threat to people. They were mostly small constrictors and harmless varieties that fed on, of all things, rats. These snakes were functioning as natural pest control. The mongooses wiped them out, or came close to it. One of the larger native species is now critically endangered. Others are extinct or nearly so. The mongooses killed their competition so thoroughly that they left almost nothing behind. And with the snakes eliminated, the rat population in certain areas actually increased, because one of the rat's key predators was now gone. Let's be precise about what took place here. Jamaica brought in an animal to fix a problem. That animal did not fix the problem. Instead, it manufactured a dozen new ones, drove multiple species to extinction, and is now ranked among the worst invasive animals on Earth. The World Conservation Union places the small Indian mongoose on its list of the 100 most destructive invasive species in the world, alongside rats, kudzu, and zebra mussels. Jamaica accidentally built a disaster. And somehow this is not where the story ends, because other places looked at what was happening in Jamaica and decided they wanted in. Hawaii brought mongooses over in 1883. Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, islands across the Caribbean and out into the Pacific all concluded that mongooses were the answer to their rat problems. Every single time, the same outcome. The rats stayed. The native wildlife collapsed. Extinctions followed. The mongoose became a bigger crisis than the rats had ever been. But the imports kept happening because nobody was paying attention to Jamaica, or they were, and simply did not care. Hawaii is the clearest illustration of this pattern. Hawaiians imported mongooses specifically because they had heard Jamaica had handled its rat situation. Someone surveyed Jamaica in the 1880s, noticed mongooses roaming around, observed that daytime rat sightings had gone down, assumed the problem was solved, and brought mongooses to Hawaii. Nobody investigated further. Nobody asked farmers in Jamaica how their chickens were doing or checked with naturalists about what was disappearing from the forests. The assumption was good enough. By the time anyone understood that the mongooses in Jamaica had not actually solved anything, Hawaii's mongoose population was already self-sustaining and spreading. Today, mongooses in Hawaii are devastating native bird populations. The nene, Hawaii's state bird, has had its numbers gutted by mongoose predation. Ground-nesting seabirds are vanishing. Native insects are being eaten faster than they can reproduce. Mongoose damage to Hawaii's ecosystem has been measured in the billions of dollars, and here is the part that stings. Both Jamaica and Hawaii still have rat problems. The mongooses did not solve a single thing. They just gave two island ecosystems a second invasive species to contend with. The ecological damage runs deeper than most people realize, because ecosystems are not collections of isolated animals. Everything connects to everything else. When you add a predator or remove one, you do not just change the numbers of the animals being eaten. You set off a chain reaction through every species connected to them. Ecologists call it a trophic cascade. The idea is that a change at one level of a food web ripples outward in every direction, reshaping the entire system in ways no one planned for and no one predicted. Jamaica's mongoose introduction triggered one of the most dramatic and well-documented cascades in recorded history, and scientists still use it today as a case study when explaining just how interconnected and fragile island ecosystems really are. The birds the mongooses consumed were pollinators. They distributed seeds. They regulated insect populations. With the birds gone, certain plants stopped reproducing effectively. Their numbers fell. The insects those birds had kept in check started multiplying. Some of those insects were agricultural pests. The result was fewer birds, more crop damage, and declining plant diversity, all traceable back to mongooses. The lizards and frogs that disappeared had been controlling a completely different set of insects, filling a role the birds never covered. With those animals gone, those insect populations surged. Some of them were mosquitoes. Mosquito numbers in Jamaica climbed following the mongoose introduction. More mosquitoes meant more disease. Dengue fever, which had been relatively uncommon in Jamaica before the 1880s, became more prevalent in the following decades. There is no hard proof of a direct connection, but the timing raises questions that are difficult to dismiss. And the snakes, again. They were eating rats. They were eating pests. They were holding the balance. Removing them made the original problem worse. Jamaica effectively spent money to dismantle its own natural pest management. What most accounts skip over is the direct human cost. Mongooses discovered almost immediately that farms were easy targets. A chicken coop is a mongoose's equivalent of a fast food window. Everything is there. It cannot escape, and there is no real fight. Farmers all across Jamaica began losing livestock to the very animal that was supposed to be helping them. They had to invest in reinforced coops, stronger fencing, upgrades they could not afford, all to protect against something their own government had introduced. Mongooses also developed a taste for fruit. Mangoes, bananas, melons, whatever was growing. They could not devastate sugarcane the way rats did, but they found other crops to damage. So farmers ended up dealing with two pest problems instead of one. The sugar industry, the entire reason for this experiment, saw no meaningful improvement. Rat damage continued at roughly the same rate as before. The whole exercise cost enormous amounts of money and ecological capital and delivered nothing to the people it was supposed to protect. By the early 1900s, it was impossible to pretend the situation was anything other than a catastrophe. Scientists were cataloging extinctions. Farmers were furious. The government came under pressure to act. So it tried. It introduced bounties, bring in a mongoose tail and get paid. This was the same approach that had failed with rats years earlier, and it failed again with mongooses. People killed thousands, tens of thousands. It made no difference. Mongooses reproduce faster than any bounty program can eliminate them. 3 were being born for every one that was killed. The money ran out and the mongoose population barely noticed. The government had essentially tried to drain the ocean with a bucket. Poison was attempted next. Mongooses are too sharp for it. They learn to leave unfamiliar food alone. Traps had the same problem. Mongooses are intelligent and they adapt. Organized hunts were organized. Groups of people would fan out and drive mongooses into corners. They might kill dozens in a day. It would not reduce the overall population in any measurable way. The Jamaican government effectively surrendered by the 1920s. The mongooses were not going anywhere. The damage was already locked in. The only remaining option was to protect whatever had survived and wait. That is still essentially the situation today. Millions of mongooses occupy every corner of Jamaica, from city outskirts to mountain forests to beaches. The ecological losses are permanent. The Jamaican coney is never coming back. The bird populations that crashed will not fully rebuild themselves. The island's natural systems have been restructured in ways that cannot be reversed. But Jamaica has not stopped trying. Conservation teams are constructing mongoose-proof enclosures for the critically endangered Jamaican iguana. These are not simple fences. They are engineered barriers sunk deep into the ground with outward curving tops to block digging and climbing. Inside them, iguanas can breed without being killed. It is working, but slowly, and the cost is significant. Similar protected zones are being created for vulnerable ground-nesting birds, with fencing and seasonal monitoring during breeding periods. Some species are edging back from the brink. For every one that is, there are others that pass the point of no return before anyone could act. Research into mongoose-specific disease agents and fertility controls has been ongoing for years. Nothing has proven deployable at the scale needed. The mongoose population is too dispersed, too adaptable. A pathogen lethal enough to reduce their numbers would almost certainly harm other animals. Contraceptives cannot be reliably delivered to a wild population scattered across an entire island with no fixed gathering points. The more realistic goal, the one serious conservationists are working toward, is not eradication. It is management. Suppress populations near critical habitats. Maintain protected zones around the most endangered species. Reduce harm where possible, and accept that the mongoose is now a permanent feature of Jamaican ecology. That is a grim conclusion, but it may be the only honest one. The broader lesson is one that keeps having to be taught because people keep refusing to learn it. You do not alter an ecosystem without understanding it in full, and full understanding is much harder than it sounds. The men who imported mongooses to Jamaica were not reckless idiots. They had money, experience, and genuine problems to solve. They just did not think carefully enough about what they were doing. They did not ask what mongooses eat when rats are unavailable. They did not ask what happens when a predator with no natural enemies is dropped into an island with no experience of it? The answers to those questions were available. People in India could have told them. No one asked. This failure has repeated itself over and over across continents and centuries. Australia's cane toad introduction, New Zealand's stoat problem, Florida's Burmese python crisis. Each time the structure is identical. An animal is brought in to solve one problem and becomes a worse problem itself. The scale changes, the geography changes, the specific damage changes, but the core error is always the same. The lesson does not seem to travel well across generations or across borders. The Jamaica situation had an additional layer that deserves recognition. The people who made the decision to bring mongooses over were wealthy colonial landowners and administrators. The people who absorbed the consequences were poor Jamaicans who lost their chickens, lost access to forest animals they relied on for food, and lost livelihoods they had no way to replace. The decision-makers faced no personal cost. The people with nothing to spare paid for everything. That pattern runs through environmental disasters with uncomfortable regularity. Jamaica is now trying to extract something of value from the wreckage. Ecotourism initiatives explain the conservation challenges visitors encounter. School curricula include invasive species education. The mongoose story has become a teaching instrument for a new generation. It is the best available use of a genuinely terrible situation. The mongooses, for their part, are thriving. They have conquered the island entirely. They are fully established across every habitat. Given enough centuries, they may eventually be reclassified as native. Time has a way of laundering origins. Things that were forced into a place eventually stop being treated as intruders. But that is no comfort to the species that were erased and cannot be rebuilt, no matter how much time passes. There is one final irony worth noting. In India, mongooses are in decline. Habitat destruction and human encroachment are pushing some populations toward threatened status. So the animal is disappearing in its home range while overrunning the places it was forcibly transplanted. We have somehow managed to damage both ends of the equation simultaneously. This is the story of how Jamaica tried to solve one problem and created something far worse. They got exactly what they asked for. The mongooses killed the snakes. They killed just about everything else alongside them. Rats included in some areas eventually, but only after the rest of the ecosystem had already been dismantled. And 150 years on, Jamaica is still managing the consequences of 9 animals that should never have been loaded onto that ship in Kolkata. If this held your attention, subscribe. More stories like this one are coming. Stories about the times humans tried to outsmart nature and ended up outsmarting themselves. And perhaps, somewhere out there, someone with the authority to make decisions like this will watch and pause before doing the same thing again. It probably will not happen, but the possibility is worth something.